You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
After having graduated with a degree in journalism from NYU back in 2002, Michael Hastings almost immediately took up a post with Newsweek, eventually becoming an embedded reporter in Iraq and spending much of the proceeding several years there, which he then parlayed into experiences for several books, including a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, The Operators. But it is perhaps for a Rolling Stone article that he penned back in 2010 that he will be best known. In that article, The Runaway General, Hastings reported on some of the very incendiary statements of General Stanley McChrystal, statements that eventually got McChrystal dismissed.
The president having accepted McChrystal's forced resignation because of the general's scornful remarks about the commander-in-chief and other administration officials in the now infamous Rolling Stone magazine interview. At a Rose Garden News event, the president saying General McChrystal's explosive comments and those of his top aides left the general unfit to lead.
Rather than me simply expounding on Michael Hastings, his viewpoints, and his journalistic career, why don't we leave that up for him to explain himself, as he did just over a year ago in an interview that was recorded by Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks.
The Newsweek that I knew has been totally decimated and destroyed after it was sold for $1 a couple of years ago. But when I was at Newsweek, when I started it, there were 26 foreign correspondents. They now have 2.
Wow! See, that's a really interesting fact. I didn't know that.
So coming up in the media, I've kind of witnessed this kind of industry-wide change from a very kind of ground level. You say.
What years were you at Newsweek?
2002 to 2008, and then in 2008 I covered the presidential election for Newsweek. That was and covered Secretary Clinton, who was in Senator Clinton, and then dropped out and then quit Newsweek after she left because I kind of got sick of Newsweek.
Oh, that's interesting. You were covering Senator Clinton at the time.
At the time when she was running for president.
Yeah. And so what, is that when you went over to Rolling Stone?
Then I started going to Afghanistan, and I'd go for Afghanistan and Iraq for GQ for about a year and a half, and then started writing for Rolling Stone. Mm-hmm. So I basically, actually, you my audience might find this interesting. Newsweek I found was too mainstream, and I couldn't actually write what I really wanted to say. And I kind of got sick of it, and I was like, I don't give a f***. Like, I'm quitting this great job I have where I'm getting all these benefits and going out on my own, and started doing my own things kind of in the wilderness, and then started writing for Rolling Stone.
Okay, so once again you've said something really interesting. So how did that process work? So you would write something, and what your editor would say what?
It's not even what the editor says, it's just these sort of legacy media companies have particular voices. And what I saw again and again was that the most interesting things that I was filing would end up on the cutting room floor, right? And sometimes it'd be details, say, about a death squad, sometimes it'd be details about something else, but the stuff that I was most interested in never actually made it into the magazine. And so I got to think, why is that? And I think there's those sort of typical, you're writing for the sort of middle American audience, so they don't want to take too many risks one way or the other. I think that's part of it. But I also think that there's a certain level of truth that you can kind of convey through the sort of that kind of magazine, and you have to go elsewhere if you really want to get close to the bone, at least for my opinion.
So do you remember anything that stood out to you, like where you wrote something, you're like, oh, this is really good, but it's, I wonder if it'll push their buttons, and then it turned out it didn't get picked up?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, here's a more kind of clear-cut example of that. Had I done I did a big story about General Stanley McChrystal for Rolling Stone. That story would not have made it into Newsweek.
Now we're having a conversation.
They would have taken all my good stuff, and they would have buried it in the story. It would not have.
So talk to me about that, because if you guys don't know, obviously Michael, huge story about about General McChrystal, and eventually General McChrystal stepped down because of the revelations in Michael's story. That's old school journalism. He was there, he documented it, etc. And I remember when it came out, I praised you to high heaven, not knowing you at all, because I was like, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to cover them and then reveal to people what your government is doing, etc., etc. So it had real impact. Now, a story like that, Newsweek in the old days, you would have loved, right?
Right. Depending on I'll do a caveat. The Newsweek, as when John Meacham was editor, they would not have printed my story. I can guarantee you that.
Why do you think that is?
Political reasons, for reasons that there's a sense that at Newsweek we were supposed to kind of uphold, that we're supposed to sort of reinforce our societal myths, not deconstruct them and not kind of expose them. And so there was a real mission there. I think certainly under Meacham sucks.
Okay.
He's on my enemies list, one of the people I wanted to go on a rant on at some point this week, where they were not going to push the button. Like senior military officials, despite how they've lied to us for a number of wars, despite the Pentagon Papers, despite all we knew from that kind of Newsweek mainstream perspective, we're going to be on this pedestal, and we would not have criticized them in that way. And I know this for a fact, because you can actually go back and read Newsweek's profile of McChrystal, which was done by a really great reporter, a guy named, I don't want to get him in trouble, but they took this great reporter's stuff and they buried it, And so one of the reasons I actually knew that, there would be kind of an interesting story here, was because when I read this original Newsweek story a year before my story came out, and I was like, wow, the reporter is trying to tell the truth here, and his editors are killing it. And if you have editors who are willing to kind of let that stuff free, let it go, then maybe there could be something there.
That's really, really interesting, because I wrote an article, I don't remember how many years ago now, on Huffington Post saying, the headline was Fire the Editors. Because I said, look, I'm reading these amazing stories, but I'm reading them on A27. Of course, I immediately knew that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, because if you read the whole paper, you knew that. They would tell you, right? It's not but they buried it. That wasn't the headlines. And when you go on TV, it's even worse, right? So I felt like the problem wasn't the reporters. The problem was the editors who were making these decisions on what to highlight, what to bury. Now, I wrote that God knows how many years ago, but it turns out, there you were in the trenches, and that's exactly the experience that you had.
Exactly, and you could see, and the pressure, certainly not for the Iraq War, you could sit around the editorial room, and you could see people whose entire careers you think would have been opposed to something like that, like flipping light switches, stepping in line to kind of support these policies. Mm-hmm. Exactly as you're saying. It's so difficult to kind of try to get the real news kind of into the paper, into the magazine. The New York Times, it has a couple people who do it and do a great job. The Washington Post has a couple people who do a great job of it. But the editors make it difficult.